The Oprichnina, Origins and Causes. The Dying Tsar. Moscow, 1553. The Tsar is 22, and he is dying of a fever. Around his bed stand the boyars, Russia's highest nobility. All they have to do is swear loyalty to his infant son. But they stay silent. Each of them is already guessing who will take the throne instead of the boy. And Ivan hears everything, and remembers everything. The Tsar recovered, but the trust never did. The illness of 1553 divided Ivan the Terrible and the boyar aristocracy forever. Death of the Tsarina. Anastasia Romanovna, the Tsar's first wife and almost the only person who could calm his rage. 13 years of marriage, and a sudden death. Ivan did not look for natural causes. He looked for poisoners, and found them where he always did, among the boyars. The death of Tsarina Anastasia in 1560 broke the last break. No one was left at the Tsar's side who could hold him back. The fall of the Chosen Council. The Chosen Council, a small circle of advisors who had reformed the country with Ivan for 10 years, the priest Sylvester and the low-born nobleman Alexei Adashev. Now the Tsar is certain, they were not helping him rule, they were ruling instead of him. The reforms are over. Around 1560 the Chosen Council fell, the Tsar lost his moderate advisors, and the last obstacles on the road to terror. Kurbsky's flight. Andrei Kurbsky, a war hero of the conquest of Kazan and a friend of the Tsar's youth. A man Ivan trusted with entire armies. But after the setbacks in Livonia, Kurbsky understood, the next disgrace would be his. And on a dark night in 1564 he crossed the border, to the enemy. Kurbsky's flight to Lithuania hit Ivan personally. If a friend could betray him, then anyone could. Kurbsky's letter. From abroad, Kurbsky sent the Tsar a letter that all of Europe read. Why have you destroyed the strong in Israel? Meaning the best men of his own country. Ivan answered, across dozens of pages. So began the most famous correspondence in Russian history, a duel of letters between a Tsar and a fugitive. The Ivan Kurbsky letters became a literary monument of the age, power and freedom arguing in the voices of the 16th century. Departure to Alexandrova Sloboda. December 1564. The Tsar suddenly loads the treasury, the icons and his family onto sledges, and leaves Moscow without telling anyone where or why. This is not an escape, it is a chess move. Ivan is waiting for the country to panic without its Tsar and come crawling to beg him back. On any terms. The departure to Alexandrova Sloboda, a fortress some 100 kilometers from Moscow, became Ivan's boldest political gamble. Founding the Oprichnina. The two letters. A month later, two letters arrive in Moscow. The first, to the boyars, you are traitors, and I renounce you. The second, to the common people, against you I hold no anger. The calculation is as precise as a knife, the city boils over, the crowd demands the traitors, and the nobility stands alone against everyone. January 1565, with two letters the Tsar set the classes against each other and won the people as his ally against the boyars. The delegation to the Sloboda. Picture it, the flower of the state, boyars and senior clergy, kneeling in the snow, begging the tsar to return to his own throne. Ivan got what he wanted most, the entire nobility publicly admitted, without him, they were nothing. On January 3, 1565, the delegation begged the tsar to come back, on conditions he would dictate himself. The tsar's ultimatum. The tsar's condition was unheard of: give me part of the country as my personal domain, there, I am my own law. With the right to execute traitors, without trial and without the Boyar Duma. That is how the word Oprichnina was born, from the Old Russian, oprich, meaning, apart, a special realm taken by the tsar apart from all the rest of the land. Dividing the country. A line was drawn across the map of the country. The Oprichnina, the tsar's personal domain, taking the best lands and trade routes. The Zemshchina, everything else, left to the boyars and the Duma. One state, two governments, two armies. Chaos in administration was programmed in from day one. The division into Oprichnina and Zemshchina paralyzed both government and economy. The decree on the 1,000. The Oprichnina recruited not the most noble men, the most loyal ones. Each received land seized from its former owners, and a single duty, to be the tsar's hound. So appeared the Oprichnina 1,000, Ivan's personal army, which grew several times over in the years to come. The capital of the Oprichnina. Alexandrova Sloboda turned into a fortress monastery, palisade walls, guards, entry by pass only. From here the tsar ruled the country, and from here the punitive detachments rode out. For several years the Sloboda was the de facto capital of Russia, the capital of fear. Symbols and rules of the Oprichniki. The ritual at the Sloboda. In the evenings the Oprichniki put on black monastic robes and went to church, but they swore their oaths not to God, but to the tsar. Ivan played the abbot of this grim monastery. The Oprichnina copied a monastic order, except that here, the service was terror. Dog heads and brooms. Two objects hung from every Oprichnik's saddle. A dog's head, to bite treason. A broom, to sweep it out of the country. The dog's head and the broom became the most recognizable, and most terrifying, emblem of the age. The Oprichnik's Oath. The Oprichnik's Oath promised the tsar everything: to inform on friends, to renounce family, to punish without mercy. In return, total impunity: no court could judge an Oprichnik except the tsar's own. The Oprichniki answered only to Ivan the Terrible: ordinary law simply did not exist for them. The Oprichniki's Feast. The feasts at the Sloboda thundered through the nights, while the tsar peered between cups into the faces of his own hounds. Which of them has already betrayed me? Impunity did its work. The elite corps turned into a gang where everyone informed on everyone. The cult of cruelty was devouring the Oprichnina from within. The first executions of its own men were only years away. Terror and executions. The Assembly of the Land, 1566. In 1566 the Tsar convened the Zemsky Sobor, an assembly of elected men from all classes, to approve the war. But the delegates began to speak of something else. Hundreds of them signed a petition, a collective plea: "Sovereign, abolish the Oprichnina." The brave men did not understand who they were dealing with. The answer was arrests and executions of the petitioners. Asking the Tsar for mercy proved deadly. The execution of Fyodorov. Ivan Fyodorov, master of horse and de facto head of the Boyar Duma, one of the richest and most respected men in the country. Too respected. Legend says the Tsar sat the old man on the throne, bowed to him as sovereign, and struck him down with his own hand. "Here is the price of your ambition." Fyodorov's execution in 1568 made it plain, no one in the country was untouchable anymore. Metropolitan Philip speaks out. Metropolitan Philip, head of the Russian Church, born of the noble Kolyachev family, remained the last man who told the Tsar the truth to his face. Right in the Dormition Cathedral he refused Ivan his blessing. The Oprichniki reached for their weapons inside the church itself. Philip denounced the Oprichnina publicly, the only man in the whole country to do so. The deposition of the Metropolitan. The answer came fast. During a service, Oprichniki burst into the sanctuary, tore the vestments off the Metropolitan and threw him a ragged cassock. In 1568 Philip was stripped of his office and locked in a Tver monastery. The church lost the right to intercede for the condemned. The murder of Philip. Malyuta Skuratov, the Tsar's personal executioner and the most feared man of the Oprichnina, entered the prisoner's cell with a pillow in his hands. In 1569 Malyuta smothered Philip. The murder of the head of the church, a line beyond which nothing sacred remained. The death of Staritsky. Vladimir of Staritsa, the Tsar's cousin and the last unpunished prince, a royal relative with lands and an army of his own. His very existence Ivan considered a threat to the throne. At a feast the prince was handed a cup of poison, and ordered to drink. In front of his family. 1569, with Staritsky's poisoning, the Tsar's last lawful rival vanished, and with him, the last unpunished in Russia. The trial of the Oprichniki. The terror reached its own creators. Alexei and Fyodor Basmanov, father and son who had stood at the very origins of the Oprichnina, found themselves in chains before their own Tsar. From 1570 the machine of terror began grinding up the Oprichniki themselves. The denunciation of Novgorod. Novgorod, the richest trading city of the country, used to centuries of freedom, had long irritated Ivan. All that was missing was a pretext. The pretext was manufactured. A denunciation was slipped to the Tsar claiming the Novgorodians had conspired to defect to Lithuania. A false denunciation became the pass for a punitive march on Novgorod. The Novgorod Massacre. The March on Novgorod. In the winter of 1569 the Oprichnina army moved north. Burned villages marked its trail. The Tsar marched through his own country as through enemy land. The march on Novgorod of 1569 to 1570 became the bloodiest page of the Oprichnina. The sack of Tver. Tver simply happened to be on the way. That was enough. The city was plundered, its people killed without distinction and without count. On the road to Novgorod, Tver and Torzhok were laid waste, for nothing but their location on the map. At the walls of Novgorod. The Novgorodians trusted the Tsar's letters of mercy and opened their gates with bread and salt. They did not yet know the city's sentence had already been signed. In January 1570 Ivan the Terrible entered Novgorod not as a sovereign, as a punisher. Judgment in Novgorod. The reprisal lasted for weeks. Whole families were thrown through holes in the ice of the Fokhov River. Witnesses said the water would not freeze over the bodies. By various estimates, 2 to 10,000 people perished. Novgorod never regained its former greatness. The looting of the churches. From St. Sophia Cathedral and hundreds of churches they carried out everything: icon casings, bells, sacred vessels. The war demanded money, and money was found. Stolen. The riches of Novgorod migrated wholesale into the Tsar's treasury. The miracle of Pskov. Pskov was next. The city was saved by Nicola the Holy Fool, a wandering prophet whom old Russia allowed to tell anyone the truth. He held out a piece of raw meat to the Tsar. "You are worse, you eat human flesh." And the terrible Tsar backed down. Pskov escaped a full massacre. Legend says the Holy Fool's audacity saved it. Returning with the loot. The wagon trains of Novgorod loot crawled toward Moscow, but the Tsar did not feel like a victor. Treason now seemed to lurk in his own ranks. The Crimean threat and the abolition. The burning of Moscow, 1571. Devlet Giray, the Crimean Khan, ruler of a steppe power that lived by raiding, broke through to Moscow itself in the spring of 1571. The Oprichnina army, which had spent years making war on the unarmed, met a real enemy for the first time, and scattered. In 1571 the Khan burned Moscow to the ground. Only the stone Kremlin survived. The Tsar's flight. The Tsar who terrorized his own country fled from the foreign enemy first, abandoning both his capital and his subjects. The military disaster of 1571 laid the truth bare: the Oprichnina had not strengthened the state, it had bled it white. The Battle of Molodi, 1572. A year later the Khan came back, this time for all of Russia. But at the village of Molodi he was met by a united army, Zemshchina men and Oprichniki standing in one line at last, under the command of Prince Mikhail Vorotensky. The result, the total rout of an enormous horde. It was not the Oprichnina that won. Unity won. The Battle of Molodi in 1572 saved the country, and unwittingly passed sentence on the Oprichnina: nobody needs an army split in two. The order of abolition. Ivan knew how to face the obvious when it struck at his power. The system built to protect him had nearly destroyed the country. In the autumn of 1572 the Oprichnina was officially abolished, as suddenly as it had been created. The forbidden word. Ivan went further, he banned the word itself. Saying Oprichnina out loud could cost you your life. The Tsar tried to erase his experiment from the country's memory, but history does not forgive such things. Burying the terror. Yesterday's masters of life burned their black robes and shaved their beards. The people hated them, and the Tsar no longer protected them. Vorotensky's return. Even merit could not save you. Vorotensky, the country's savior, was soon accused of treason and perished. The Tsar's paranoia made no exception for heroes. Aftermath and economy. The ruined lands. The central districts emptied out, fields overgrown with weeds, villages standing without people. Those who were not killed fled to the borderlands. The Oprichnina ended in the deepest economic crisis and the desolation of the country's heartland. The Forbidden Years. Working hands were catastrophically scarce, and the state answered simply: it forbade the peasants to leave. Even honesty. George's Day, the one day a year when, for centuries, a peasant could change masters. The Forbidden Years, a temporary ban on peasant movement, became the first step toward serfdom. Defeat in the Livonian War. For a quarter of a century Russia fought for access to the Baltic. An army worn down by purges and split into Zemshchina men and Oprichniki lost that war. Defeat in the Livonian War of 1558 to 1583, a bill made out directly to the Oprichnina. The empty treasury. The Novgorod gold melted away within a few years, and there was nowhere left to collect new taxes, no one remained to pay them. Autocracy triumphant. Formally, Ivan had achieved everything: the uppunished destroyed, the nobility broken, the Tsar's power boundless. Only now he ruled over a devastated country. The Oprichnina strengthened the autocracy, at the price of the country itself. A nation in fear. Worse than the empty treasury was the fear: neighbors distrusted neighbors, servants informed on masters, and everyone waited for the knock at the door. A society trained to denounce took decades to recover its trust. The shifted center of power. Foreign ambassadors now traveled not to Moscow, but to wherever the Tsar sat, to Alexandrova Sloboda. A state with two capitals and a scorched heartland was rapidly losing weight in the eyes of Europe. Key figures. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible, the first Russian Tsar, architect and chief ideologue of the Terror. A brilliant writer, a fervent worshipper, and a man whose mind was broken by fear and suspicion. The whole Oprichnina is one man's personality projected onto an entire country. Malyuta Skuratov. Malyuta Skuratov, born Grigory Skuratov-Belsky, the chief executioner of the age. The hands with which the Tsar did his dirtiest work, from torture to the murder of the Metropolitan. In Russian, the name Malyuta became a common noun, a synonym for executioner. Metropolitan Philip. Metropolitan Philip, the only man who said no to the Tsar at the top of his voice. And paid for it with his office, his freedom and his life. The Church canonized Philip as a saint. Conscience proved more durable than fear. Andrei Kurbsky. Andrei Kurbsky, the friend who became an enemy. To some, Russia's first dissident, to others, a traitor who went over to the foe. His flight became the spark that set the flywheel of the Oprichnina terror spinning. Devlet Giray. Devlet Giray, the Khan who burned Moscow. It was he who proved, without meaning to, that the Oprichnina army could only fight the unarmed. The raid of 1571 pushed the Tsar toward abolishing the Oprichnina. Historians' verdicts and conclusions. Karamzin's verdict. Nikolai Karamzin, Russia's first great historian, delivered his verdict in a few words: the madness and tyranny of a sick mind. For Karamzin, the Oprichnina is a tragedy without meaning and without excuse. Solovyev's verdict. Sergei Solovyev saw it differently, a painful but inevitable breaking of the old clan order for the sake of a new state. For Solovyev, the Oprichnina is a cruel necessity of state-building. Klyachevsky's verdict. Vasily Klyachevsky put it most precisely of all: police against treason, that struck at people but did not change the order of things 1 inch. In Klyachevsky's judgment, the Oprichnina turned out to be a pointless, supreme police. The final verdict. The country survived, but with scars that lasted for decades: empty villages, a frightened society, peasants on the road to serfdom. The sum of the Oprichnina: devastation, lost standing in the world, and the first step toward enserfing the peasants. The Tsar's tomb, March 18, 1584. On March 18, 1584, the Tsar died while preparing for a game of chess. The Oprichnina died before he did, but its greatest lesson outlived the centuries: fear does not strengthen power. Fear destroys it. The Oprichnina gave the Tsar absolute power, and took away the country's strength to live under it.